Hello and welcome to the Willis's Kitchen for our second video clip to accompany our study of the history and philosophy of education. I bring you to our kitchen because I want to tell a story about how to bake a ham, which I think is illustrative of some of the things that happen in the history of education. Actually, I think it's a very useful metaphor for understanding the history of education in America. The story, you may have heard the story, goes like this. A young woman was entertaining guests and she was baking a ham. She took the ham and she cut about a third off the end of it and put the big part in a big pan, the little part in a little pan, and put both pans in the oven. One of her guests was already there and observed this and said, "Why did you do that?" "Do what?" "Why did you cut the ham in two and put it in separate pans?" She said, "Well, that's how you bake a ham." "Well, why?" the guest said. She said, "I don't know, that's just how Mama taught me to bake a ham." Well, they got to talking about it and thinking about it, and they couldn't come up with a good reason. Curiosity got the best of them, so they called Mama. She called Mama and said, "Mama, why is it when you bake a ham, you cut about a third off the end, put the big part in a big pan, little part in a little pan, and put both pans in the oven?" And Mom said, "Well, that's how you bake a ham." "But why?" "Well, I don't know. That's the way Grandma taught me to bake a ham." They got to thinking about it and talking about it, couldn't come up with a good reason. Curiosity got the best of them, so they called Grandma and said, "Grandma, why is it when you bake a ham, you cut about a third off the end, put the big part in a big pan, the little part in a little pan, and put both pans in the oven?" And Grandma said, "Because I don't have a pan big enough for a whole ham." Now, I hope the moral of that story is pretty obvious. The practice began with Grandma's generation, and Grandma had a perfectly good reason for doing it given her situation. But the practice continues after the reasons are gone. We just do it that way because we've always done it that way. Now, I dare say if you spend a little bit of time in schools looking around and thinking about it, you can identify some things that are there for reasons that no longer exist. Practices that continue even though the reasons are gone. I dare say you can go in virtually any school in America Monday morning. Go into the teacher's lounge at some time when there are a lot of people in there and propose something new. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be something silly, it could be something really important, it could be something terrific. But there's a very high probability, I think, that when you propose something new, someone will offer as an objection, "We've never done it that way before." Schools are very conservative places. They tend to cling to practices. "We've never done it that way before." When I think about this, the first one that comes to mind for me is, well, this is September. We just came back into school a few weeks ago, and we had a summer off. Schools all across America, public schools, high schools, public schools, colleges, everybody, take summers off, almost all. So why do we do that? Why don't we take this off? There is a downside to us taking summers off, of course. Kids lose a lot of what they learn in the spring over the summer if they don't rehearse it. So teachers end up spending a lot of time in September reteaching things that were taught back in the spring. So there's a price to be paid educationally for us taking summers off. So why is it we take summers off? Well, actually the reason is because when we started public schools in this country, we were an agricultural society. Most people lived and worked on the farm, and most teachers worked on the farm during the growing season. The kids and teachers alike worked the farm during the growing season. So school was something you did in the off season. You work the economy, the agricultural economy during the growing season. You go to school during the off season. And of course, we're not an agricultural society anymore. You know, we may shut down the school. Right here in rural America, we may shut down the schools for 3 months in the summer and not a single teacher or kid works the farm. But we keep doing it. Why? Well, of course, there are schools that don't do that. There are schools that are going to year-round schooling. But one of the biggest oppositions to year-round schooling is people who will say, "That's just not how we do things. We've never done it like that before." Schools are places that tend, once a practice is established, schools tend to cling to those practices. I'm not sure exactly why. Teachers and administrators tend to be conservative kinds of people who like the way things were and they want to keep them that way. But for whatever reason, schools tend to perpetuate the past even when the reasons for those practices are gone. I dare say if you think about it for a while, you can come up with some other examples. Now, quick digression here. Having grown up in Louisiana, I know the growing season is more than 3 months in Louisiana. My dad used to plant his garden in late February. And what that shows is that the most influential parts of the country in the establishment of schools in America were not the states of the Deep South. It was the Northeast. New England was the forerunner of most of our educational practices early on in schooling. And so whatever they did eventually tended to become normative for the rest of the country. They had a relatively short growing season, relatively long winter, and so the school year got set up that way, and eventually that was carried over into southern states. Now, again, think of other practices that may be continuing something that really isn't needed anymore. Why do we do what we do? It would be an interesting exercise for you to try to find things in the school where you're currently teaching or doing your field experiences that were started for good reasons, but the reasons may not be there anymore. And if you think of some, I'd like for you to share them on our Blackboard site. Thanks.